Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone to KSU's Research with Relevance Friday Features. We are back again for the 5th episode of the Chairs and Directors Showcase. And I'm excited for our guest today. Marsha Barsky is the chair of the Department of Dance in the College of the Arts. Welcome, Marsha.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone.
So my name is Phaedra Corso. I'm the Vice President for Research here at KSU, and our goals with these Friday features has been the same, beginning with the pandemic and continuing on, and it's to connect with our colleagues across both of our campuses and to learn about the great research and scholarship that we're doing. And it's been a pleasure to do this, and we'll have a wonderful show today. A few housekeeping tips before I begin. First, please make sure all of your mics are muted, which I see that they are. Let's keep ourselves muted until we get to the question and answer section. If you want to pin a speaker, you just have to click on the 3 dots that are by the person's name. And then finally, just as a reminder, this episode is being recorded and will be available on our Office of Research YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So the schedule for this next hour is that we will be watching a video giving an overview of Marsha's research, and then we'll do a live interview and audience Q&A. So if you have a question you'd like to ask throughout the discussion, please signify this by sending a note through the chats feature if you have access to it, or you can raise your hand in Teams, or just feel free to interrupt us when we get to that part of the hour. So let's go ahead and begin. So I'm happy to welcome again Marsha Barsky. Marcia joined KSU in July of 2020 in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And so I think we'll need to ask her about what that experience, how that experience was. She has over 20 years of experience as a choreographer, a performer, an educator, and somatic movement practitioner, which we're going to learn about in a second. Her current research focuses on how to expand dancers' abilities beyond technique classes and use the rehearsal space and time as a means of learning somatic-based practices to enhance their dance. And she does this through the study of theoretical practices. So now let's go ahead and watch a short video.
My name is Marsha Barsky, and I'm an associate professor, and I serve as chair of the Department of Dance in the College of the Arts. I'm a dance educator, choreographer, somatic practitioner, and teacher of the Alexander technique. My early work as a dancer was to follow a pathway familiar to many dancers. I trained in ballet in my youth, and then in my early 20s, I discovered the joys of modern dance. This was a revelatory time for me because it gave me a new level of freedom to explore movement in my own ways. I loved ballet and I still do, but I feel that modern dance provided exciting new ways of thinking about movement. One of my principal aims as a dance educator is to cultivate somatic-based learning environments so that students develop, integrate, and hone a holistic, embodied sense of self. Somatic is a term coined by philosophy professor and movement educator Thomas Hanna and refers to the unification of the entire body, mind, environment, and spirit. By increasing somatic awareness, it is possible to recognize inefficient habitual patterns of movement and move with more ease, freedom, and expressivity. As a teacher of dance technique, I strive to help students connect their dance movements to their ongoing thoughts, sensations, and perceptions in order to help them achieve their artistic potential. I have discovered that these objectives are readily attainable in dance technique classes and in somatic-specific courses, but the process is more challenging during the dance rehearsal, where I often assume the role of both choreographer and teacher. In an effort to design a somatic-based learning environment that supports the rehearsal process, I have delved into works that consider self-other relations. and the conveyance of meaning through embodied movement. This is a vast area of work that has been considered in realms including philosophy, pedagogy, and psychology. This work falls under an array of rubrics, including action theory, performance studies, phenomenology, somatics, and other approaches to internal mind-body dialogue, feedback, and listening. One of the main ideas in all of my somatic work is that there is a kind of dialogue that exists within the self and between the self and the environment. The inner dialogue helps us to think about our actions in ways connected to such categories as sensation, perception, autoregulation, feedback, and listening. This inner dialogue can emanate beyond the self and into the environment in which the self is situated. To account for this approach to dance making, I found value in imagining the process as an example of dialogism, a crucial term associated with philosophical writings of Mikhail Bakhtin. Bakhtin has a lot to say about how people interact in space and in time through a category of his work known as the Chronotope. This is one of Bakhtin's major contributions to philosophical work, and for it he draws from two distinct, but in his sense related realms, chronos and topos. Chronos, or time, is always part of topos, or space, and all spaces are infused with time. This means that we cannot separate time and space, so we always have to be aware of how we are situated therein. This leads to another one of his crucial terms, situatedness, which demands that we consider where someone is in regards to ourselves, where they are situated relative to us, in time and in space. The other has the same experience of considering how she is situated in regards to the other, a practice that increases our awareness of self, of other, and the self-other relationship inside a broader framework. Discovering the work of Bakhtin was eye-opening, since he posed many of the questions that were interesting for me from a more philosophical perspective. Bakhtin lived from 1895 to 1975, and much of his crucial early work was developed in the modern period, pretty much in conjunction with the development of modern dance. His overall interest was what he called a philosophy of everyday life, in which he thought deeply about how language is situated not just on a linguistic plane, but in the entire body. For dance education, it is helpful to integrate Bakhtin's work alongside a movement practice that is quite well known in the realms of the performing arts, the Alexander technique. This technique was developed by Frederick Matthias Alexander over 100 years ago, in the very same period as Bakhtin's work. Alexander was an actor and a teacher who developed an educational process to movement and thinking that allows the student to recognize inefficient patterns of movement caused by chronic tension, overuse, or misuse of muscles. Since both men were near contemporaries, there are interesting overlaps in the ways they consider the dynamics of interaction, particularly in performance. In my recent research, I've focused on the rehearsal process as a vibrant space for accessing somatic sensibilities, because this is the space in which the student actually learns and experiences the work. My training in the Alexander technique enriches and enhances the rehearsal experience in the studio. For instance, I've noticed that for students who are new to somatic practices, finding an embodied sense of self during rehearsal can be very difficult. By helping dancers understand their situatedness, I can offer guidance that exceeds the simple transmission of the choreographic material. I hope that this research helps inspire dance makers to consider the ways in which they are creating a space for embodied rehearsals, and thereby enliven conscious movement experiences, psychophysical unity, and mindfulness in action.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful video, beautiful images. Marcia, was that you in the very beginning? Where you couldn't see your face, but you could see your beautiful form?
In a younger version of myself. Yes.
Beautiful, really, really beautiful. And a big thank you to Megan Lowney, who's our new StratCon person for development with Marsha on that video. Is outstanding. So thank you. This was I just love the idea that that dancing, which for someone who's not a dancer, to me seems just a practical, tangible, physical thing. You've now kind of elevated it up to being theoretical at its core, and so I really appreciate that. But help me understand. So the theory, I think, is was described very well in the video. Help me understand what an example of a somatic-based practice might look like. What would an exercise in practical sense look like?
Well, thank you. And again, it's fantastic to be here and share my work, which has been really the work of my career for the last 20 years with KSU, especially being new to the KSU community. It's nice to be able to share my approaches. So there are many different modalities that fall under somatics, and I'm trained in something called the Alexander technique, which is a very specific approach to creating a conscious connection between the mind and the body through very specific activities and exercises. So for me, it's really about recognizing what it is that we're doing that might cause either chronic tension or overuse or misuse and imbalances in the muscular skeleture of the body, and help the student recognize how to, in what Alexander calls an inhibit or pause and redirect the self into a use that is more balanced and whole. So something really simple from notice if you have any tightness in your shoulders and can you release that. It's really about recognizing and noticing and attuning to one's personal experience of how they are existing in their body. So we do it through very simple movement practices. In an Alexander lesson, it would be standing up and sitting down in a chair, and again, just noticing and recognizing and talking about and bringing language into the experience of the movement. Very simple.
And so when your students are learning about this practice, do you see them having an evolution over the period of time that they're learning about this, and not just in their dance movements, but also just in their everyday movements? Like, because it just seems like it translates to your whole life, not just to a performance.
Indeed, and that's one of the things I find most accessible about the Alexander technique, and what attracted me to it is that it really is a technique for everyday living, from sitting in a chair to driving a car to making dinner, folding laundry, or doing something very complicated like dance. So there's an application that's very universal, because we exist in our body, or what Alexander calls the whole self, daily, all the time. And it's just a matter of tuning in and recognizing again, inefficient patterns of movement. So that lower back pain might actually be caused by the way in which someone sits in a chair, or the way in which someone shifts their weight into one hip. So it just allows the students to recognize that there's no division between their dancing self and being in their body every day, all day long. So that it creates more of an integration and an understanding of how to consider movement from a more holistic perspective.
I love it. We've got a question that's popped in already. Tyler, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Phaedra, and thank you, Marcia. This was really enlightening for me. As someone who, movement in my life is the distinction between sitting at my desk and standing at my desk. It was very interesting to see this. And one of the concepts that really stood out to me in the video was this idea of kind of that holistic somatic-based learning. The holistic term was one that really just stood out for me. So I'm curious, from your perspective and given your expertise in this area, is that an approach or a style of learning that you think could be applied in other fields? I think specifically about physically oriented fields like folks going into physical therapy programs and training, or or other areas where that approach to teaching and learning and that somatic-based learning style could be applicable?
Well, thank you, Tyler. I appreciate that question. And indeed, I that's one of the things that I find so exciting about the Alexander technique as a particular somatic practice. Again, there are many others, but it's been used widely in everything from physical education to rehabilitation, occupational therapy, psychology, physiology, music education, dance education. But for me, I also was looking at Alexander is a modality, it's a practice. And I was looking for a way to understand it on a deeper level, find a way to actually describe and put thought and language to what it is that I was experiencing and doing in my own body. And that's why I was also really drawn to this other thinker and philosopher of language from the early 20th century, a man by the late 19th century, early 20th century, by the name of Mikhail Bakhtin. And Bakhtin's theories have actually been applied to education, to, again, psychology, philosophy, language theory. And so I feel like there's a really interesting theoretical overlap with the practical application of Alexander to many different domains and disciplines.
Good, thank you. Evelina, your hand is up.
Yes, I have a question. This might be a very basic question, but I was really struck about when you're talking at the beginning of the video about how you started off in ballet, and that when you got to modern dance, it brought so much joy to be able to experience that level of freedom of movement. So I was just curious, as a non-dancer, what does modern dance include? What does it encompass, and how does it compare to other forms of dance?
Thank you. That's such a lovely question. I think my training in modern dance was from 20th century modern dance pioneers and teachers that came out of a very specific lineage. And at the time in which modern dance was developed in Europe and the United States, it really was an opportunity for dance makers or choreographers to make their own language, to really create their own language of movement. Ballet is a very codified dance. It has a very clear vocabulary, a very clear structure. The vocabulary was used as choreography on the stage. And in the 20th century and in the modern dance domain, that was sort of turned topsy-turvy and down, where choreographers were really looking at the ideas, the thoughts, the context for what they wanted to do, and how movement could create a way to support their own artistic practices. So they were really making up their own vocabulary for movement. They weren't following a codified discipline or a codified approach. They were able to use their body as a source of research and use movement as research to create ways of which to interpret a concept or an idea through what the body is able to do, through the actions of simple muscles and joints, and coming up with a sophisticated way and a stylistic way to shape and form an approach to choreography.
Great, thank you. Monica?
Thank you. What an honor. This is something I've been thinking about, being in the mental health space. It was so beautiful to hear and watch what you're doing. You did talk about the intersection of dance and using the Alexander method with psychology. I'm wondering, with all that is going on in the mental health and behavioral health arena today, especially with children, I know there are dance therapies out there, just like music therapy. Could you enlighten us on the use of this technique for dance therapy for people with either acute mental health conditions or to prevent acute mental health conditions from coming on?
Well, thank you, Monica. That's such a rich question. And I hesitate to answer that question because I'm not a trained mental health specialist. So it's really my background is truly in dance, but I do know that the particularly dance therapy and along with art therapy and music therapy and even indeed the Alexander technique have been used widely to support mental health, and particularly with children, and particularly through creative movement and play as a way to support their mental health and their development. But I really love that question and would love to think more deeply on it. But I feel like, quite honestly, I don't have the expertise to answer it thoughtfully and mindfully. But I do think it's interesting to continue to approach it in my own work and see how it does translate more broadly.
And thank you. And this is exactly why we should have interdisciplinary teams, because you bring your area of expertise coupled with what Monica does in her area. You'd be a powerhouse working together. That is for sure.
That's good. I love it.
So there's a question in the chat from Paola, who's from computer science. She says, thank you for the video and the additional explanations. Given her background, which is in computing, she's wondering if technology is used or, in your view, could be used to support the use teaching of this technique. She's thinking about devices that check for posture, but there might be many other devices as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I do. Yeah, it is a great question. I think that there's an interesting space there for potential growth in this area of research. I do have colleagues who are working in the Alexander technique, particularly at the University of Idaho, who are working with computer science for postural regulation, auto-regulation, and also with rehabilitation and how robotics and computing software can assist with that. But so I think it's a lively space, again, for more cross-disciplinary research. But I do know that that there is a greater push, particularly in the Alexander community, to develop more actual scientific research, because Alexander was working in the early to mid 20th century, and a lot of his ideas were very novel at the time, and there wasn't a lot of what we know now wasn't available to Alexander. And so as the technique evolves and as we get deeper into the 21st century, I think that there's some exciting overlaps to really understand what this great thinker was able to experience without the resources that we have available to us today.
Great, thank you. So Marcia, tell me about your students. So I imagine that the Alexander technique that you use as part of instruction and choreography resonates well with some, but not with others. And so what are the predictors of whether a student is really going to take hold of this philosophy and be successful by following it?
Well, I thank you, Phaedra. I think that's an excellent question. And I remember that actually from my own experience of the aha moment. We often call it the aha moment in the Alexander technique, where all of a sudden you experience the true balance in the body and true efficiency in the body. And for me, really, I have not been able to share this approach at KSU. I have taught 2 modern technique classes, and it was I taught in 2020 and fall of 2020 and spring of 21, where we were still in mask and very distanced socially. And so unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to share on a deep level this work with my students, because it's really a hands-on approach to learning. I need to place my hands on the dancer in order for them to experience that in their own bodies. And so I was very mindful of how I did that with the students. So I didn't actually get to really experience or share the Alexander technique with students here at KSU. But prior to coming to KSU, I taught an Alexander technique class at my previous institution, and it was cross-listed in music and theater and dance. So I worked with students from all three performing arts disciplines. But then I also had students from neuroscience and psychology and exercise science. They all came into my class. And it's really in that 15-week period of really slowing down, recognizing what it is that a student is doing and how to not do it if it's interfering, or do more if it's enhancing, that students were able to really take the time. It's a process, just like anything. You need the time and space in order to really experience it. So it's in the context of that class structure that students were able to have those aha moments. But if I'm teaching not an Alexander specific class, and say I'm teaching a modern dance class, I might come over and place my hand on the back of a student's neck and just ask them to think or direct themselves more up along their spine. And then all of a sudden there might be a little more length, and then the muscles that are holding, that are tight in the neck, will let go and release. And so it's micro movements. It's small, but again, it's a process. So it's not something that can happen immediately. It takes time, and so that's why I appreciate developing a relationship with students over time.
So now that we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic, do you have plans to teach this method in a class in the future? And I'm going to couple that question with the question from Amy Buddy around involvement of undergraduate students in research, and because she says that she knows that you're working with them, and how do they get incorporated into that process?
Certainly. Well, so I'll start with the first part of the question, which is, do I have my plans? And yes, I actually plan to continue this work with students in their senior seminar class. So I'm teaching senior seminar at KSU. This fall was my first semester teaching it, and next fall I'll be teaching it. And I just recently completed an article that talked about the rehearsal space as a space for learning somatic movement beyond the dance technique class or beyond a somatic specific class, but how the rehearsal space can support somatic learning. And I actually want to work with the seniors in their senior project to talk about the ways in which they, as choreographers or future dance makers, can be sensitive or mindful or exercise care with the dancers that they'll be working with, and how to help support them in their learning. And so I'm hopefully going to be articulating some approaches and practices and strategies for helping future dance makers incorporate these practices into their work. And so how I incorporate students into my research is really through action research, observation, feedback, and so it's really just working with them thoroughly and carefully, and really seeing if I'm able to, through my own ideas and approaches and practices, witness changes in them and their work. So that's one of the ways in which I hope to expand this at KSU.
So Marcia, in the research papers that you're writing, the data collection, it's qualitative data, I'm guessing, and is it, do you conduct focus groups? Do you conduct individual interviews? Is it pre-post learning technique? Mm-hmm. What are the methods?
So the methods are really, the first article that I wrote that just came out last semester is really just the theoretical application. So just trying to understand the thoughts behind. So I wasn't really involving students in that research per se. It was really theoretical, qualitative, and from there I developed and devised a few exercises that dance teachers or dance educators could apply in their own rehearsal process. So a way of helping dance educators look at the rehearsal process as a pedagogical space too. And so I came up with a few simple activities and exercises for them to do.
And you and I talked about this earlier this week, but I'm always interested in kind of KSU students being different perhaps than, you know, other university students. I think our students are you know, they're harder workers. They oftentimes come from first gen families, and maybe their starting point is a little bit different. They haven't been afforded the opportunity to learn ballet as a young person before they come to you and learning modern dance. And so when you have students that have different starting points, how does the Alexander technique help or hinder their ability to move to that next level?
Well, I think, thank you, I think the Alexander technique is the way to help them, because it allows them to simplify their movements. Really, it's a practice of simplification, and recognize where it is that they're perhaps maybe holding too much tension. I keep using this word, but so for example, if a dancer is interfering with their movement, the movement is going to be inefficient, or okay, I'll just give you a simple example. So if a dancer is say struggling with finding rotation, so what we call in dance turnout, where you take the head of the femur bone and you rotate it in the hip joint. Often dancers don't necessarily even know how to find the hip joint, and so they'll turn out from the knee or from the ankle, or they'll overuse muscles in order to make a shape. So they'll look at it as a shape making versus a functional movement, which is just a simple rotation of the bone in the joint. And so the Alexander technique helps me as a teacher provide a structure or a framework to help the student recognize that it's just a simple rotation of the head of a bone and a joint, and all you're doing is rotating it out. And by getting out of the way of overuse of holding muscles in the gluteus or the thighs, or using the knee as that action, then all of a sudden they can awaken more efficient movement and then create the muscular support around that. So it just, again, provides a framework for me to help them recognize that even if they've not had years of experience, it's just the functionality of the movement and how to make the movement really functional and not and not so shape-based. and they're looking at an external shape, but they're internalizing it and experiencing it on a kinesthetic level and on a somatic level, meaning that they're thinking about how they're moving. So they're understanding the movement as a thought process and not just a shape making.
Yeah, great. And just like Monica was suggesting, you know, overlap with the field of mental health and psychology, I think there's such a strong overlap with the fields of kinesiology. And you know, how you know, I think about the work that Mark Guile is doing, and he's looking at gait in children. I think so much of what you're talking about is exactly that.
Indeed. In fact, I went to his lab and watched him and was really inspired, because as he's working with gait, in the Alexander technique, we focus on walking all the time, and the way in which we think about walking, and how just by dropping downward into what Alexander would call a slump, and walking with a downward pull, can create a structure that will awaken all kinds of pain or discomfort or dis-ease in the body. And by thinking up, just by thinking up, forward and up is what Alexander calls it, then movement can be more available to anyone. So I do agree there's exciting space there, and I was very excited by his lab when I went to visit it.
And I think everybody who's listening to you today, Marcia, all of our postures are just getting a little bit straighter today. right, well, there's a good question in the chat from Evelina that asks, how do you balance, and this is a great question because balance is, I think, a question that we all have for our lives, but how do you balance being a choreographer and a teacher, and how does each role influence the other?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a great question. Well, I'm not choreographing right now, but that might change next semester. So I actually, a lot of my choreographic work was put on pause in 2020. In fact, I most recently came to KSU. I was in Ottawa, Canada for a year and was working on a project with a composer in Ottawa for a dance company in Ottawa. And so my plan was to come to KSU and then be able to go back to Canada and work with this company. But then because of the pandemic, I was not able to do that work. And so that's when things shifted for me, and I was able to think about what it is that I'm actually doing in the rehearsal process and articulate it through scholarship. And so I actually shifted course and decided to write about what it is that I'm doing as opposed to practice. And so right now, that's really been where my attention has been focused, is on the writing of my life's work and articulating it and verbalizing it and making sense of it in a different way. So that's where my focus has been. So I'm not really balancing the two right now, but I have in the past, and it really is just giving myself the time and the space to pause. Really, that's what this is about, is pausing and turning things off and just allowing inspiration to come in and taking time out to read, to take a walk, to enjoy a yoga class, and that's where I derive inspiration from. And in that time, it makes me a better artist, a better choreographer, a better teacher, because it gives me the time and space to process and allow things to integrate and come together.
Thank you. And to comment on the first part of your response, which is that, you know, you had to take a pause, as many of us did in the world of research during the pandemic, but you used it as a positive thing, which is now you can turn your attention to that paper that's been hanging over your head, or, you know, I think we could all talk about the 5 papers that we want to write one day when we have a second to do it. And it sounds like you took advantage of the time you had and did exactly that.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Tyler, you have your hand up.
I do. I wanted to get back to the classroom experience, and, you know, I'll say I'm fairly well educated, and I'm pushing 40 years old, and I was really struggling to wrap my head around this somatic-based learning, and you think you did a really good job in the video explaining that. So I'm curious, when you've got 18, 19, 20-year-old students that are coming into the classroom for the first time, how do you convey it to them? What is the message that they're coming out of their first class with about the way they're going to learn and what the semester is going to entail for them?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. For me, it's really about communication and how I communicate and articulate movement, and I help them recognize that movement. Again, I keep saying it's not just about shape making, but it's about total body experience. And I'm going to go back to Bakhtin for a minute, because this thinker helped me create a framework for how to understand something like the Alexander technique. So let's take for a moment the concept of dialogism, which really is about the self-other relationship. So me as the teacher and the student as the other, and how I as a teacher can support our relationship. So really within that space of the dialogue, the self-other relationship, I am creating I'm in a space in which we create together, and I'm holding that space, and I'm creating a space of trust and communication. So once I'm able to attend to the self-other relationship and help the student understand that, then I can say something very simple like, let's find the top of your head. And that's a really specific thing to ask a student to do. And they might not know what I'm talking about, but I'll say, do this for me, and let's all do it together. So if you find this little place in your ear where you want to close off sound, so if you close off sound and you imagine that you're drawing a space between your two fingers, and then you think about the space between your fingers and your ears, and then you go in. Now just imagine your two finger points can touch. And then you take the tip of your tongue and then you go to the back of your throat. And then all of a sudden, if you start clicking back there, you'll feel a little reverberation, and that's the top of your spine. And so I'll just have students sense. So now they're sensing where's the top of the spine. And I'll say, okay, now you've found the top of your spine. So now turn your head from that place versus here. So if a student is turning from here, then all of a sudden they've just awakened more movement versus if they're turning from here. So allowing them to find that space where greater ease and freedom of movement can be experienced. So it's really about the language. It's really about creating that self-other relationship and helping them find support so that they can trust me in that language.
Wow, that was that was wonderful. I want to take a class with you, Marsha. So you talked about the experiences you had in Canada before you came here, but what brought you to KSU?
Well, I was at a university in Tennessee, Middle Tennessee State University, where I served as the coordinator for the dance division in a department of theater and dance, and I had been there for 12 years. And in that program, I created the first dance major in the state of Tennessee. And I was very inspired by the Department of Dance at Kennesaw State University and used it as a model program. And in fact, brought Dr. Pulankala to my university to review the program that I was creating. And so when I saw the job announcement for the chair of this department, I wondered if I was up for the challenge. I was, again, very impressed by the department, by the culture and the community here, and was excited by the prospects of being in a leadership role in the Department of Dance at KSU. So I applied for the position, and it's a real pleasure to be here and to be with an incredible team. I have wonderful colleagues in the department and just the most amazing students. That's really what brings me most joys every day. And then just, yeah, the College of the Arts is a terrific place to work. And I really do love the support that I've received at KSU in my short time here.
Yes, and starting during a pandemic, no less. So, sorry, I just muted myself by mistake. So what are your plans for the next couple of years, either for you personally in terms of your research, your teaching, or even for your department? Have you all been doing some strategic planning on what the vision is?
Well, we will be, and that's my goal, is to start that in the fall, is as I enter into my third year. And the first year was really, quite honestly, just let's make everybody healthy. Let's keep everybody healthy and safe as we navigate dancing in a pandemic, and safe physically and mentally and spiritually safe and sound. And so that was really the focus of the first year. Also, the first year of my time at KSU was really directed toward our accreditation process. And so this year, I feel like my particular focus has just been understanding the rhythms of the department, understanding the rhythms of the university, and looking to see what new rhythms I need to put in place or new structures. And then my goal for next year is to start strategic planning and future thinking, establishing our 5-year goals for the department as a whole, with with the faculty and staff. And I've also been doing a lot of conversations with students, meeting them one-on-one to learn about their experiences in the department and what they want in this department. And so my time has been spent listening to them and asking them questions. So that's for the department. Personally, I want to continue to dive deeper into my understanding of the relationship between somatic movement and dance and Bakhtin. I have a chapter in a forthcoming book on Bakhtin and modernism, and he's an incredible thinker that hasn't necessarily been widely applied to dance, and so I'm interested in continuing to explore that. I'm also continuing my training as a teacher. I'm involved in a training program right now in a movement modality called gyrotonic. I'm already certified in gyrokinesis, and so I'm in the pre-training process of becoming a gyrotonic teacher, and I hope to bring that practice to KSU in a few years. So continuing to develop and grow and get new approaches and experiences and then again evolve this amazing department that I'm a steward to now.
Great, thank you. And so let me ask a little bit more about Bakhtin, and I think the situatedness was part of his theory. I feel like I've heard you talk a lot about kind of self and other in terms of the teacher-student relationship, but I wonder is there more to it in terms of others, like the audience and other performers?
Indeed, and that's one of the things that really inspired me by his work, is that when we think of self-other relationship, it's self to self, the way I have my own inner dialogue with myself. It's self to a teacher or a teacher to self. It's dancer to dancer. It's dancer to dance maker, choreographer. It's dancers to audience. So the self-other relationship is expansive depending on who the selves are and who the others are. But again, it's the space in which we create together. So for the dancer working with a choreographer, they're creating a space together. It's for the dancer and the audience, when the audience comes in, they're creating a space together. For dancers and other dancers, again, it's how we create space together. That's our situatedness and our ability to be mindful of that relationship. And so, for example, right now, Phaedra, I can only see you. I can't see the other people in attendance. So we have a self-other relationship. I see you and we're on teams, so it's a little bit different, but how I see you and how I experience you and how you see me and you experience me, that completes itself. We're now creating a complete whole of ourselves. And so that's our situatedness, is how we relate to each other. And so what's exciting to me about being a somatic practitioner and discovering his work is it allows me to think of the whole experience, not just my own, here I am over here, back here, but how we all relate together. So it's a mutual, shared, holistic experience of the world in which we all get to inhabit. So that's why I was inspired by him, is because, again, he helped me understand what it was that I was intuiting already. These were thoughts that I was experiencing as a dancer, as an Alexander Technique teacher, as a teacher of movement, and I was intuiting this. But Bakhtin is such an eloquent thinker that he was able to really help me understand and put concepts and language to what it is that I was experiencing on a level that I didn't even have the words to express.
Yeah, it's beautiful. But how do you deal with young people who are now in a world where they date, using their phone?
Yeah,
do they get it? Or do you see a change from your students now versus your students from when you started 20 years ago?
Well, yes, I do see a change in the students, a big change, and I'm trying to understand what that change is. But it all goes back to the body. I think just getting them in their bodies first, letting them really experience sensation, perception, feeling. Let them just feel what it means to close and open a hand. Like, what is that sensation? What is the sensation of breath in the body? What is the sensation of releasing tension in the shoulders? Getting them into an understanding of the perception and sensation of their body first. And then we start going out further. So we start with even something as simple as sits bones. So for example, in my senior seminar class, they were feeling a little bit of anxiety in the middle of the semester. And I said, let's all stop, let's pause, and just feel our sit bone on the chair. And all of a sudden, they brought an awareness of their physical structure sitting on a chair. And that moment allowed them to just get back into their body. And then we could start going out to the self-other relationship and being aware of each other in the room, in the space, and how we support and enhance learning. Because that's really what this is about, is enhancing of learning and enhancing of experience and enhancing of our self-other relationship.
So is yoga, something that you encourage your students to do? It just feels like that, I don't know, it just ties in very nicely with when you keep talking about, feel your breath and
Okay.
being in your body.
Well, I would encourage everyone to do yoga. I'm also a yoga teacher. Yes, but it falls under, again, these are all rubrics of somatic practices, and yoga being one, Pilates, Alexander technique. There's so many that fall under that rubric, but again, they're approaches and practices that just help us understand the mind-body connection and how we can find that relationship between the mind and body. And for me as a dance teacher, it's been very interesting to see how I can do that in all the spaces in which I occupy, being a choreographer, being a teacher of technique, being a teacher of senior seminar, being in a leadership role. How can I embody all of those different responsibilities and roles?
And I know that you teach everyone from children all the way up to senior citizens. What does that approach look like for an 80-year-old versus an 8-year-old?
That's so fantastic. Well, last spring, I actually taught a Zoom class to a community in Canada, and most of the people in the class were, I would say, between 75 and 90. And it was really interesting teaching them through Zoom and teaching. It was an Alexander and breathing class. And again, I really have the same approach. It's simplifying the language, helping them just to connect, even if it's just, let's all find an in-breath and an out-breath together, just helping them feel ease and movement and ease in their body. So I really, however, whomever I'm teaching, it's really about just connecting mind and body together.
But are you able to do that successfully with small children whose attention span is all over the place?
Well, that's where play comes in. That's where imagination comes in. That's where imagery comes in. So I think with that population, that's imagery, play, animal imagery. That's really more useful. I try not to do that so much with adults because I try to teach from places of anatomical accuracy. So if I'm asking them to imagine that they're a tree, we all might envision a different kind of tree. So I try to teach I try to create visual imagery that's actually reflects their true experience in their body. But with children, it would be more imagistic and more playful.
This is might be a little bit of a bizarre question, but it just occurred to me in a situation where you're the choreographer and you're using this technique of situatedness with me as one dancer as self and someone else as another dancer. What happens in a case where you have conflict between dancers? Have you ever experienced that? And if the answer is yes, are these techniques helpful in resolving that conflict so that they can be successful? That
is such a fantastic question. And wow, I'm just actually thinking of my own self first when I've experienced conflict and how I've been able to call upon this technique. I'm thinking of how I use it, and I, fortunately, I've not experienced great conflicts amongst students, so I feel very fortunate for that. But I would not be thoroughly truthful if I didn't say I haven't in the past. And for me, I think it's, I don't know if I can give you a specific example, but I would hope that I would be able to integrate and apply, but I think it would, again, depend on the context and just really what's the situation at hand. But I think it could be very applicable and very useful and beneficial. I'm going to think a little bit about that question, and in terms of just myself as someone who experiences, and if we have a leadership role, we're not without conflict, and so I have to remind myself when I enter into those spaces how to be mindful of these approaches and how to redirect.
Yeah, it's such a good life philosophy, and we've talked about applications, and I just felt like this would be yet another one, is in conflict resolution. And
yes, absolutely.
In the chat, I just want for you to note that Monica Nandon is inviting you into her classroom to talk to her students about expressing their thoughts and feelings through movement.
Beautiful. I would love that. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much.
All right, well, we're out of time. So I hope if there's any other burning questions, you've got one more chance to raise a hand. Seeing none, I think we're gonna draw this hour to a close. Marcia, I just want to thank you again for your time. Very, very interesting work. We're thrilled to have you here at KSU. And you should do some conflict management for leaders. Or mindfulness or something like that.
Yes, and it's really strange to have this kind of conversation on the computer, I should say. So maybe in the future we can all be together and really experience our situatedness in the same space.
I hope so too. I sure do. So for those of you who are regular participants of the show, I want to share with you that we have another Chairs and Directors Showcase on April 15th at 11 a.m. And we will be featuring Dr. Teresa Racek, who is Chair of the Department of Geography and Anthropology. So stay tuned for more information in the coming weeks by visiting our Office of Research. And with that, I want to thank Megan and Marcia again for today, and wishing everybody a happy, safe, and healthy weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.